The library was my space, and there was just so much.
To the Harbor Grace excursion with the boys to have a time.
Hello? Oh, thank God. I was so worried. Did anybody make a friendship bracelet? Did anyone make one for me? Disappointing start. Is this an event? Is this event a good way to make friends? Is this a good ploy to make friends? Are we here to make friends?
It's not a bad start, right?
Yeah. I don't think yours is on either. Let's see.
We were promised mics that would be on.
Is this my... Oh, here we go.
Is that on? You guys hear everybody? Okay, great.
Glasses have gone
Okay.
already.
Do you need them? We can rescue them.
I don't think I have anything to read.
Well, then
actually,
that's
so it's
fine.
Yeah, just don't let me go without
They're
it.
all
Yeah.
beautiful blobs to you now. You can see them from afar. Well, I'll start with both of you. You can each answer this. Do you think we need more friends? Do all of us need more friends? Are we lacking in friends? Are we lacking in hanging out?
I think there's a lot of discussion about a kind of friendship recession and a friendship crisis and a loneliness epidemic. I wonder if my proposal is that we actually all have quite a lot more friends than perhaps we realize we do or kind of are willing to admit we do. I think that sometimes the question is about how we define a friend and whether we allow ourselves to call someone a friend. You know, we might have a friend might not even know their name, or they might be a friend, a kind of very transient friendship, but those relationships still really matter. I think we're kind of enthralled to one particular ideal of friendship, which is a kind of very emotionally connected, kind of lifelong best friend. This is the kind of fantasy ideal. My proposal is that we kind of open up our perspective and allow a kind of more diverse, messy, kind of flexible notion of friendship.
I appreciate that. I think in the age of social media and, basically parasocial relationships run rampant, it's often a question of quality versus quantity. So many of us may feel like we have loads of friends all over the place, but maybe nobody who we can really talk to in person, or nobody who seems to really understand us as somebody who gets our behaviors and our habits on an intimate level. And so I think often what we're really talking about is not so much a recession of the ability of friendship, but more like the ability to go deeper with the relationships that we do have.
Can you tell me a little more about what hanging out is and what its value is? It sounds really easy. And then I read your book and I was like, maybe it's harder than I thought.
The good news about hanging out is it is pretty easy, at least on the surface, right? In the book, I tried to define hanging out as daring to do very little and daring to do it in the company of others. So there's two pieces to that equation. The first is, of course, a kind of self-conscious awareness of not doing that much, approaching these activities without too much structure or plans or ideas about what you have to get out of them. But the second part is about doing it in connection with others, whether or not that's just playing Jenga out there or hanging out in a room full of other people and listening to ideas be exchanged or something like that. It's about conviviality.
Ooh, that's a good word. I'm going to try to use that in a sentence later. Well, it feels like we just sort of like overcomplicated socializing almost. Like, can it be, does it have to be a formal dinner party? Can it be errands? Can I make a friend go to like Service Ontario with me and make them suffer in line? And that is hanging out.
I love running errands with friends.
Right.
I mean, yeah, it's not something that's maybe always feasible in everyone's schedules on a daily basis, but if you want to go grocery shopping with me, yes, I love that. Like killing two birds with one stone, getting something done that you need to get done, but doing it in that kind of like social atmosphere. Absolutely.
I think there's a distinction that's sometimes made between a friendship that unfolds face to face and one that unfolds side by side. And I think I love running errands with friends as well. I think this is a brilliant way to connect with people and in a very sort of meaningful, day-to-day, intimate way, actually. And I think it is enabled by being kind of shoulder to shoulder, so that there's not a lot of pressure there, actually.
To your point about overthinking friendship, I think sometimes we do feel like there's a lot of pressure to make friendship an event every time, but it doesn't have to be, right? It can be made up of these really mundane little pieces.
Yeah.
Well, how did we get there? How did we get to a place where we feel like to hang out with a friend or to make a friend, it has to be maybe bigger than it is? Like, I feel like I need to roll out a red carpet when I make a new friend where I'm like, dinner? when I really just want to like sit on my couch and stare at my phone and you stare at your phone. And every so often we look up and you say, "Did you see this?" And they go, "Mm-hmm."
But you know that feeling of intimacy when you're sitting on your couch with somebody and they're looking at their phone and you're looking at yours, but you both feel okay in that moment? Like you're not performing for each other because you understand that you have that level, that quality of your friendship. And that occurs through repetition, right? We have to repeatedly work at those things and through maintenance. It's not something that forms overnight. And I think sometimes we can be impatient with our relationships of thinking we want to get them to that level in a very quick period of time, which is, of course, not realistic.
I think that's a really great point about repetition. I was remembering there was a particular moment in my life where I had felt quite lonely. I'd shifted careers, and so I'd lost a lot of the friends that I'd made at work. And also, you know, I was kind of in my late 20s, and so a lot of my friends were kind of going off and getting married and moving away and having children and stuff. So I felt a real turbulence in the friendship world. But I had a dog at that point, and for the first time in my life. And every day I was walking the dog and meeting the same group of random people every morning, and we'd walk together around this football pitch. And it took me about 6 months to realize that those people had become my friends, you know, and it was because of this repetition. I was seeing them every day, and we'd talk about the most banal things, the weather or whatever, and then we'd talk about very deep things like, you know, grief and loss and stuff. And I knew those people very, very intimately, actually, but it was simply because of this repetition. We were just doing the same thing every day, yeah.
How do you feel about small talk? I feel like people have demonized small talk, but I don't know how the fuck you're supposed to make a friend if you don't.
Yes, I love small talk.
Yeah.
We need it, right?
Yes. I saw Joyce Carol Oates bemoaning small talk on social media years ago, and I think small talk is this really, really fundamental glue of society, right? Talking about things that affect us all, whether it's weather or construction in the city or, you know, trains that are running late or whatever it happens to be. This is just a way that we kind of share our everyday experiences and grievances with each other.
And also it's generous, isn't it? Because it's a way of saying, okay, I know that we don't know each other and we've got nothing really to say to each other, but let's just talk, you know. So let's just talk about the bus being late or the fact it's raining or whatever, you know. It's just, and it usually is an entry point, isn't it, to something a bit deeper. So yeah, I'm really pro small talk as well.
Well, you wrote a lot about the history of friendship, especially female friendship, which it seemed like at times and still is demonized in interesting ways. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how female friendship specifically has been looked at historically. I know that's a very big question, but if you could wrap up about 100 years of history in a super quick answer.
Like
we don't have too much time, so.
So my lecture begins here. Well, no, the key thing that is really worth knowing about the history of gender and friendship is that for hundreds and hundreds of years, it was really men's friendships that were put on a pedestal, you know. So if you look to antiquity, you look to the Renaissance, you're looking at very romantic male friendships that are celebrated, you know, men writing very passionate essays and letters to each other, even men buried next to each other who are very, very close friends. Female friendships, you know, as I think we all know, usually imagined to be troubled by envy and bitterness and rivalry and so on. So really in these big essays and letters about friendship, very famous one is Montaigne's essay about friendship, really thinks women are just basically incapable of being good friends. That sort of shifts in the 19th century. And female friendship becomes part of a sort of new expectation around female behavior. The idea is that women are aspiring to be these kind of domestic angels of the house. You know, they're generous to their children, they're loving to their husbands. And one way they can show that they're capable of doing that is by having friends. So you get this sort of trope that happens in 19th century novels where the girl who's able to make close friends as a girl kind of grows up to succeed and gets married and has children. And the girl who has, you know, so you think about Jane Eyre or something like that. And then the girls who have troubling, difficult friendships when they're young kind of grow up to have difficult or unhappy marriages as they get older, like Villette, like in Villette. So we sort of get this idea of female friendship as being really essential to the perfect woman, and that idea then carries on in the 20th century, but it's joined by a whole set of new ideas about friendship and freedom. You know, women are able to embrace their independence and live in cities and get work and so on, away from men, away from their families, because they have friendships, because they're able to make close relationships with other women and live with them and work together and so on. So we sort of inherit this really muddled history, I think, where on the one hand, so it's three different things going on. One is this kind of women are just incapable of making sincere friendships. The other thing is, female friendship is really important for a conventional femininity. And then the third thing is, friendship allows women to be radical and independent. So we're sort of three completely contradictory things that we're all having to sort of navigate when we're thinking about female friendship today.
You did it. You rehearsed 100 years
did
of
it.
female friendship history.
See?
I'm going to follow up with something much less intellectual. I'm going to quote from the quote a day journal that I had when I was 15 years old. And I don't remember who said this quote, but I remember there was one quote in it that said, men treat friendship like a football. They kick it around and drag it through the mud, and yet it lasts. Women treat it like something made out of glass, and it shatters into a million pieces. And I remember even then thinking about like the gender dimensions of how we view friendship through these lenses, right? That men are able to be like tough and heroic with how they view friendship and treat it, and maybe that's why we celebrate it then. You know, these men who are famous friends, whereas women is just supposed to be part of who you are, and so is like the catastrophic fallout that's supposed to come from that too. So just thinking about the stereotypes that govern the way we see that.
Jesus Christ. I'm going to think about that one. That doesn't make me feel good. I think I'd prefer the football. Oh my
Blame
God.
the Quote a Day Journal.
Yeah, I'm going to write a letter. There's a lot of talk about the male loneliness epidemic, and I am truly loath to talk about men at all. But I am curious if there's anything that these guys need to do to help themselves. I would ask if there's anything women need to do, but I'm really hoping, again, the answer is no.
Yesterday, while I was killing some time in this wonderful fair city, I went to the TIFF Lightbox screening room to see the Oscar-nominated short films. And afterwards, this guy leans over the seat to me, this stranger, and he says, "Which one do you think is going to win?" And I said, "Oh, definitely that first one," because it was about male loneliness. It was about a bunch of guys in a bar, and they have a singing contest, and they all hug at the end. And I'm like, this is on topic. Plus, it's got Sam Elliott in it. So, like, this is going to win. And it did indeed tie for the Oscar. But I was thinking about that short film being very timely for our discussion of this male loneliness epidemic, that there seem to be gendered stereotypes that are actually creating barriers to the way that men are able to form friendships and the way that they're able to mature and keep those friendships. So that's something we're talking a lot about in the US, but I know elsewhere too, is what men can do in order to basically try to subvert that trend and keep friendships going.
I think that's really useful, and I think that the stereotypes are problematic. But I also think that most of us at some point or another are going to struggle with friendship. Friendships are complex things actually to create. The rules aren't always obvious. The kind of dance that we have to do to make a new friend isn't always obvious. It's not choreographed in the same way that, for example, making a romantic relationship might be. Or even a relationship with a neighbor where there's some sort of geographical proximity. So it is sort of complex. And I think that I spent about 5 years writing my book, and I spoke to a lot of people about friendships and the difficulties they'd had with friendships. And sort of a few things came up over and over again. I mean, one of them was to do with rituals and kind of repetition, which I think we've sort of covered a lot. Something was to do with reassurances. So I think it's quite common actually for people. I've spoken to a lot of people about the endings of their friendships, and one of the things that comes up over and over again is, well, I just didn't really think they were kind of invested in the friendship anymore. They kind of didn't always return my calls, or I felt like I was doing all of the heavy lifting. I was the one always suggesting where we were going to meet, or that should we meet up, and so on. And I kind of just felt like it was unequal, and that maybe I was imposing myself. These kinds of ideas has come up over and over and over again. So I'm almost certain that everyone in this room has had that experience, and I can see some people nodding. So, and I think that that's a really important one. So, to understand that it does matter that, that you text someone back if you want to keep them as your friend. It does matter that you try and check in with them every so often. And I think, I can't, it's silly to sort of generalize about men and women, but I think it is important that that sometimes it can feel awkward to do that, or you feel like you're imposing yourself. And I think to recognize that actually those little moments of connection are hugely important. So having sort of a ritual that you might do together, maybe you always go to see a particular sports match, or you go to a particular bar or cafe, or you go shopping together, whatever, and having these moments of reassurance where you're just reminding someone, you do matter to me, I do think about you. I think that seems to be very, very important in friendship.
If I can add on to that just fast, I think friendship, as you've been saying, is so much about the work of maintenance. And maintenance is like distinctly unsexy activity, right? It's the stuff that you don't see. It's the stuff that doesn't get congratulated or rewarded. But that's what it is. It's about maintaining the health of a situation. And that's just not particularly fun work sometimes. But when you put the work in, over the long run, it pays off.
Yeah, it's a practice, isn't it, friendship? Friendship is a practice. It's not just a thing that happens and then goes. It's like a thing you have to do. Yeah.
Something to do and not something to have, just to have. Yeah. Well, I was going to ask. We talk so much about female friendship and what that looks like and what the benefits are too for women to be in community with other women. Do women get the same benefits of hanging out or being friends with men? Or how is that different? I'm curious how that relationship is different, or if you've thought about it, or if you think about how it's different for us.
I do think about it probably too much. There are moments when I was just having this realization where I was looking around and being like, why are so many of my friends men? What am I doing wrong?
Yeah.
But I think, sometimes we have different expectations in the way that we approach these dynamics within relationships. And sometimes it can feel freeing to be operating outside of some of the expectations. There is that kind of understanding that women place a lot of pressure on relationships with their friends. I think sometimes that's just a stereotype and not always totally true. But it can create this feeling like, oh, that's too much investment. That's too much work. Maybe I want something else that's going to be easier to maintain or something like that. But I was also realizing the other day that I think one of the reasons why I have so many male friends is that a lot of my female friends are mothers, and they are caregivers, and they're busy, and they're doing all that other kind of maintenance work that makes them less available at certain points in their life. And that I may have failed to even recognize those moments where those people, may have not been available to me but wanted to be, and I might not have really acted on trying to keep that relationship alive in a way I should have.
Right.
I was just going to say that's such a major transition in female friendships, isn't it? And I think it's one that is really hard to... So this doesn't particularly speak to the... Actually, maybe it does speak to the question of having friendships with men. So I actually don't have many male friends these days, and I'm really struck by that as well. I think, where have all my male friends gone? And I think a lot of it is also to do with this kind of question of childcare and the way and power, and the way this kind of you start to kind of wonder, well, I don't know, they might not really understand the constraints of my life and so on. But I was going to say that that transition when people have children can be huge, can't it? And it does take a real adjustment. I feel particularly proud, actually, of most of my close friends actually don't have children, and it's one of the things that I feel really proud of managing to keep those relationships going, because I think it would be very easy to just sort of sink into a kind of new kind of bunch of people, who are all mum friends, but
I only
also
hang out with
quite
moms
dull.
now.
Yeah. So I feel like, oh great, I can imagine a more exciting life through you.
Well, I wanted to ask you, Sheila, about how our world is designed to kind of keep us from hanging out. I know it's capitalism's fault.
Everything is.
As everything is. But I'm curious, what is keeping us from being able to fulfill the dream of, living in a walkable city and walking to your friend's house and sitting on their couch and having it be easy?
Yeah, well, you're already hitting on a really big part of it, right? Which is that it has to do with the intentional design of space. And space is a key factor that we need to foster relationships of all kinds, not just friendships, but the relationships that we have with each other in our communities, in a democratic society, with our neighbors. If we don't have public spaces, neutral spaces where we can meet other people, we are forced to always move those relationships to private spaces. And private spaces operate according to different rules and different demands, and the power imbalance is often not equal in those spaces. So space is a major component. The other big component, of course, is time. We're all extremely busy. I think we are often encouraged to disincentivize hanging out, wasting time, spending time with other people, because it doesn't read as always being like productive or related to the ways that we're supposed to be getting ahead and succeeding.
I'm curious if you noticed any cultural differences in how people hang out. I was talking to some friends of mine who are all people of color, and we were talking about how when we have an issue with a friend, we just like don't talk to them for a minute and let them run it out for a bit, and then maybe we try again. But with our white friends, they're like, we're getting letters with like on scrolls written in ink about what they're upset about, and then I gotta reply to it. Like, I don't want to do that, lady. Just wait 90 days and maybe we can figure it out. And I feel like this is a real distinction culturally that I've noticed. I'm curious if either of you've found anything like this or have thoughts on it.
There are certainly cultural specificities to how this works, and I don't want to generalize too much about populations that I'm not a part of.
I think you should do it.
Instead, I will generalize about populations that I am kind of a part of. But in the U.S., I've noticed even regional differences to the way that we approach this issue. You know, the U.S. is a really big country like Canada is, and we have our own regional behaviors. I used to live in the Midwest, and the Midwest in the U.S. is known for being very polite and outgoing on the surface.
Midwest nice.
And in the Midwest, what we like to say is like, everybody's really nice to your face and everyone's talking about you behind your back, right? But where I live now in New England on the East Coast, it's the exact opposite. And what I've learned there is that everybody's kind of mean and stony to the face, and they're all saying nice things about you behind your back. But they don't want you to know, because the nice things are actually vulnerability. Like if they get caught out complimenting you, it's going to make them look
I'd
weak or
rather
vulnerable.
die. I'd literally
I know.
rather die.
And so it like took me a long time to realize that somebody would tell me to pass a compliment along to somebody else, and that was also kind of a compliment to me because it meant they could trust me with that information. It's a whole thing.
I think it's really, I think, well, I just wanted to say that I think it's a really important point, actually, this question of, I think what some people call friendship style. And I think it's true that, you know, there's been a lot of research on the cultural differences in how we make friends, how we practice friendship, our expectations around how often we should meet, how close we should be, how much of ourselves we should share, what we do when there's a problem, you know, whether it's the scrolls, whether it's the silence, whatever, you know, and this has been seen across the world. And one of the things I really take from that is a recognition that friendships, you know, that everyone has their own style of friendship. You know, we all grow up in different families. We all grow up in mini cultures. We all learn slightly different styles. And every friendship is so singular, right? You know, it's so distinct to that particular relationship you have with that particular person. So you sort of have to learn a friendship each time you're friends with someone. And I think just knowing that every friendship has a different style just makes it possible for them to
it's
sort
like
of
social
negotiate
literacy, right? You're
is,
constantly renegotiating these things and learning new ways to read a situation and another person.
Yeah, because we're sort of taught in our culture, you know, that's not how a friend should behave, or a real friend wouldn't say that, or you know, God forbid, you know, that's really toxic behavior, you know, that's a toxic friend, stay away from that person. As if there's these kind of universal rules of friendship, and there really aren't. You know, all there is these different styles. You know, some people want you to check in with them every day. Some people, you know, think that once every 6 months is completely appropriate for a close friendship. You know, you just have to negotiate each friendship as it comes.
Oh, it's a lot of work. But I do feel now I'm going to go tell all my white friends what you said and be like, that's why I'm late. It's my friendship style. And you have to meet me at my level, which is 20 minutes.
It actually means I love you, right?
It actually means I love you. They didn't buy that when I said it. Tiffany, why do we expect female friendship should be perfect, should look perfect? It feels like it is TV's fault, which breaks my heart. I love TV.
Yeah, I love TV too. But I think it is, I think it comes from this, you know, Victorian idea that female friendship is a sort of like signal of how feminine a person is, how caring they are, how attentive they are, how willing they are to put someone else before themselves. So I think that, part of it is a hangover from that. And yeah, of course it got kind of calcified through various fictional TV characters, fictional characters in movies, in popular fiction and so on. And I think, those kind of images kind of get passed down, and we can, and now it's like it's, social media, how many glossy ideals of female friendship are there on social media, and how impossible are they to live up to? So yeah, these things it's how it gets transmitted, for sure.
Does it exist? Does that
Absolutely
kind of
not. No,
yeah,
of
it's
course
not
it
real.
doesn't.
Oh, okay.
Of course it doesn't. And yet it's incredibly powerful, and it can make people feel really rubbish, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Well, I want to talk to you both about boundary setting, because I think you both wrote about, like, there's sometimes a point where maybe the friend isn't the right person for you, the hang is not the right hang. But I'm curious for both of you if you think that we bail on friendships too fast or without maybe the right reasons. I don't know what the right reasons would be, but for both of you.
Yeah, so I just had a friend. Oh, this is being recorded, huh?
It sure is. So you should definitely say it. And if you could look right in there
Right.
and maybe read her social security number, credit card.
I just had a friend who was in town visiting me where I live in Vermont, and my friend is a really high-octane, intense individual, and he's going through a rough moment in life, so I kind of knew this was going to be a difficult hang. Like, he was coming to town for 4 days. I'm like, this is going to be hard. It's not going to be a chill time, and it was not. But also, I've known this guy for 20 years, and so I also know how to kind of like anticipate when things are going to be a little bit more rough for him or me or whatever, and how that dynamic's going to shift. And I also have learned a lot more like tolerance and forbearance of his moods. So with a guy like that, because I've known him for 20 years, I don't take it personally. I don't take what he does as like a judgment on me and the status of our relationship. I just recognize, like, I know I caught him at a bad time, but I'm also glad I could be there for him during that time. Next time it might be totally different. We might have a totally different feeling with each other. Friendship, hanging out, these things are often about like developing tolerance and developing patience, because you're not always going to catch somebody on a good day.
Right.
And if you just bail because it doesn't work out the first time, then you're not going to be able to develop any kind of deep intimacy with somebody, right? So it's about developing that patience overall.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that also it's a lot to do with with adjusting our expectations as people change over time. So, when you're younger and you might be with friends, every day, then you have always a chance to repair the kind of ruptures that happen. As we get older and we see our friends less often, it's much harder to do that in a sense. So, and we have to kind of adjust to the way that, year in, year out, people do change. Their values change, their life experiences change, and they might be very different to our own. And sort of recognizing that and having, as you say, some patience and some sort of tolerance for the differences between us, I think, is also really, really important. And I do think there's a temptation to just kind of think, this is not working anymore, I'm out.
Yeah.
But those friendships, especially the old ones, our friends are like our memory boxes. They've known us, like, who we were 20 years ago, who we were 10 years ago. It's very, very precious.
Which is not to say that we have to hang out with jerks. I just want to make that clear.
Well, that was going to be my next
required to
question.
hang out with jerks.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, which is how do we know when it's time to maybe end a friendship, or when we gotta leave the party, whatever it is? What is maybe your personal measure for it, and then what do you think is, if you have anything applicable for the masses?
That's a really difficult question, and it's something that is always, negotiated on a case-by-case basis, I think, in our relationships. But I think one thing to kind of keep in mind, as we've been talking about, is that, friendship and relationships, they are work, they are acts of maintenance. And I think sometimes when it can feel appropriate to exit a relationship is when it feels like you're the only one doing the maintenance, right? When it's entirely one-sided. And that can be a temporary thing because these things have ebbs and flows. But I think when you notice a pattern over a long amount of time, especially with someone you've known for a while, and you feel like you're the only one that's ever reaching out, or you're the only one that's ever making the effort, or something like that, it can feel like, well, maybe this is just not something that's working equally for both parties.
I was making a very sweeping.
I just pulled my earring out, so that's where we're at. Glasses
I
and
wanna
borrow
earrings.
one of mine.
It's right there. Don't worry about it. I still have my ear. The other one.
Okay.
Yeah, the other one. Yeah, don't worry
where
about
we
it.
sort of expect kind of quite decisive decision making around friends or kind of relationships in general. I think we live in a this is a very big generalization, but we live in a culture that really values our ability to choose. And I think we kind of potentially apply that to friendships and think, well, I'm choosing this friend, and now I'm choosing to not have this friend anymore, and I need to make some kind of very decisive and clear exit. And I think sometimes that is appropriate, of course, but there are other situations where I think it's kind of fine, and maybe this is because I'm English, but perhaps it is fine to just step back a bit, perhaps just reduce things, just leave the door open. It doesn't have to be the grand gesture, it doesn't have to be some final decision. It can just be like quietening things down again, and then perhaps in a year or a few years you might end up reconnecting over some other kind of situation or circumstances that brings you back together again. So I think when I was younger, I felt quite a lot of pressure to think, well, that friendship is not working, it needs to end. And I didn't really know how to end it, so this caused me an awful lot of grief. Now I tend to think, okay, well, that friendship, for some reason, it's feeling difficult, and I've tried, and it doesn't really work. I'm just going to kind of take a step back, but it doesn't. I'm not sending them a scroll. I'm just
God bless.
Yeah, I'm just keeping it as an option for the future, because our friends, in a way, that's what's interesting about friendship, is that we do form friendships in this very sort of there isn't a kind of defining moment where you say, that person is now my friend, and there also isn't, therefore, a defining moment where we say, right, that friendship is over, I've had massive busts up with friends in the past, and that friendship is still survived. We haven't spoken for 10 years. I mean, when I was writing this book, I was reconnecting with a lot of friends who we'd had really difficult bust-ups with, and hadn't spoken to for 20 years. And, and then I said, well, I'm writing this book, it's about friendship. Do you mind if we have a chat about what happened? And they were like, yeah, sure. Anyway, pal. And then we just got back to it, It was really funny. I wasn't expecting that. So,
Did you reconnect with people through the book then?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
What a ploy.
Yeah, it was ingenious. That is the way to do it. If you've lost a lot of friends.
Yeah, pretty good. Well, what about managing friendship through political differences? I think we've been talking about this more and more with Trump's second term. I think we talk about it with October 7th. We talk about it with how our friends post online. They're talking about it here with whatever, your loser friend who voted conservative because she really believes in his economic policy or whatever. Like, do I have to be friends with that guy? Like, or can I bail there at least? Is there a safe place to bail politically on a friendship? Or is there real value in it still?
That's a very tough question, and I think it's part of an international dialogue that we're having on multiple levels. But I think it does depend on what the friendship or the relationship itself was built on originally. Where did you first meet that person? What brought you together? What did you have in common from the beginning? And is that commonality something that you still care about? Is it still important to you? Maybe even enough that you can have difficult conversations about politics, even though you disagree with them? I think it's important to have those conversations. And in friendships where you have that mutual kind of understanding and respect for each other, it's possible to have them. It's not possible to have them if you don't have that basis, though. That feeling that you both are in it for something.
Yeah, I think that's a really good distinction, isn't it? I think that sometimes a friendship can be bigger than a political issue, for example. I mean, and then you sort of think, well, there's a whole range of things that this relationship is about. And one of them that's difficult is politics here. But, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that we can engage in together. And that's how I would mostly treat it. But I do think, I think there's real value in the possibility of reaching out across divides and trying to find friendship there.
Yeah, I've had friendships that have changed my mind about things, right?
Yeah.
Like good friends who have allowed me, and probably, through a lot of work over a long period of time, to see an issue differently. So I think about that as being the power of what happens when we have those connections.
Well, do you think there's value in maybe less so sort of having these defined roles of friendship or friend with people we don't like, but inviting them to the hang? Yeah. Less so about like political difference, you maybe don't want that guy there, but just someone who you're like, I don't like them. I don't like them and I don't like their vibe, but I'm trying to figure it out, or they're just not your person. Is there value in that?
Well, I mean, you have to like something about
them,
right?
Yeah, obviously.
There's
There's something in there. Or you have a mutual
basis.
friend or something, but what is the value of sort of getting to know someone who's maybe not you're just not always connecting. I'm just
Yeah.
curious about that kind of casual, like, acquaintance who comes in. You're like, what's up with that guy?
And
Do I like
I think
them?
it's fair and reasonable to understand that there are people who shine in different kinds of circumstances and different kinds of occasions. You might have friends who are not great at parties, right? Maybe just not outgoing, don't thrive in a room full of strangers, but that doesn't mean that there isn't like a place for them in your life or other ways that you can engage with them and hang out with them.
That's a nice answer. I'm gonna send that to anybody who doesn't invite me to a party. That was a question for me and me alone.
Do you feel better?
Yeah, I do, actually. Do my online friends mean as much as my in-person ones? Is that the same? Does it do the same thing for me?
I think it does. I think it's. When I said at the beginning that I really wanted to kind of expanded notion of what friendship is, I mean, this is one of these areas where we could really expand our ideas about friendship. So when I was looking at the history of friendship, I was looking at close friendships that were made by trans women who were in chat rooms, in very early internet chat rooms, and they describe writing essays about their experience of meeting other trans women in chat rooms online. And they described having very intimate and caring relationships with these people whose real names they didn't know, right? These are all people who are, highly undercover, as it were. So they didn't know their real names, they didn't know what they looked like, et cetera, but they felt seen, they felt connected, they felt a real meaning in their community. I thought that was really moving. I think we spend so much time, and I do as well, demolishing social media for the ways in which it makes us feel terrible about ourselves, the ways it's divisive and so on. But of course we can make very profound and important relationships in this space too. And it just goes to show that I don't think friendship requires us, even to know someone's name. It might even be possible to have a friendship with someone that's very transient. And some very meaningful friendships I've formed, in person, but, been traveling and, you've traveled with someone for a few days and then you've never seen them again, but I still remember that person, I still remember the conversations that we had. So I think this is kind of a bigger version of friendship that allows us to take seriously those kinds of relationships that we form online.
I'm going to answer with a story. When I was 30, I got my first big girl professor job, and I moved to North Dakota. If you've never been to North Dakota, it's like Manitoba, but much worse. And I did not have any friends in North Dakota.
Oh, wait, hold on. I love a drive-by shooting for Manitoba. From an American, no less. That's like triple points.
Just realized that like my weekend trips to Winnipeg were my saving grace when I lived in North Dakota.
Yikes. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well.
But I didn't have any friends there. I didn't know anyone there. I had no family. I had no connections. And I moved to a school where I spent a lot of time working in my basement office that had no other colleagues located near me. Like, I just didn't see some people a lot. And I started to develop relationships on the internet with friends and colleagues at other universities, and those were very important to me because I'd suddenly entered this landscape that was not filled up with people and wasn't filled up with those social relations. Now, this wasn't an earlier era of the internet and of social media, and I think it's even reasonable to understand that some of the changes we've seen in social media, especially over the past 5 years, occurred because social media was working too well to have us make friends with each other. Since then, things have been shifted around to cause us to make bad relationships with each other instead, because it was almost too successful at the time. So I do think we can have meaningful relationships through the internet, through social media, etc. I don't want those to be anyone's only relationships or anyone's only recourses, but yes, absolutely, they can be meaningful and important.
Thank God. Thank God. Has the quest for productivity and optimization, which seems to be kind of a big focus for a lot of people, things have to be fast and they have to be optimized and there's no mulch at the end of it. I feel like it makes us a little unwilling to deal with the slow burn of friendship. I'm wondering if you guys have thought about that sort of everything has to be quick and easy and like convenient and serve a purpose.
I do think that our interactions online and through digital media have habituated us to pretty fast instant gratification, but also to the ability to exit uncomfortable situations when we need to pretty painlessly. So if we are having a conversation with somebody on social media that we don't like, we can exit that conversation. If somebody is texting with us and we don't like what they're saying, we can just not text back and walk away from that without a lot of social repercussions. And I think that has lowered our sort of overall patience and attention span for the interactions that we have with people in person, with some potentially disastrous social consequences, because those relationships are about maintaining that kind of patience.
I agree, but I was really struck by research that I read that suggested that actually even when people ghost each other, which is, the thing that has, that social media and texting and so on seems to have made completely possible. And we think, well, that's an easy solution. But research suggests that, both people who have been ghosted and people who have done the ghosting suffer enormous consequences from doing that. It isn't like free and cheap. It's actually extremely expensive because, psychically expensive because people become, lose confidence, especially if they're the one that have been ghosted. But also the ghoster suffers terrible kind of guilt and kind of concern about their own behavior and so on. So I think there's perhaps a sort of idea that we've learned how to do this and it's really, really simple for us. But actually, I don't think it is so simple for us. So I can't remember where I was going with that.
But you don't have to see someone's face when you
don't have to see.
That's true.
When you tell them you don't want to be their friend anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is something about friendship that is, by its nature, inconvenient. I think that's really important. And I don't mean just that it's inconvenient because, you've got to make time and, it involves some hanging out that may not completely serve your particular purpose at that particular moment. But also that we have to engage with the inconvenience of another human being, and other human beings are just by their nature completely different from us. We're not identical or the same. We're not talking to an AI chatbot that's like, just echoing back ourselves to us. We're talking to another human, and another human has their own worldview and their own interiority, and we have to negotiate that. That is what a friendship is, and that is inconvenient. So, inconvenience is like built into friendship, I think.
There was a piece of writing that went viral a little while ago about how inconvenience is the price for community, and that you need to be inconvenienced if you want to have friends. And part of the problem is everybody has sort of co-opted a version of this therapy speak, which is, these are my boundaries and I will not allow anybody to override them. But sometimes it seems like it is a bit about that discomfort.
So like, I'm willing to have this much inconvenience, right? But no more than that.
Yeah, and that's maybe not going to get you far all the time with your friends.
Like, I think we all know that feeling of when we're talking to somebody, a friend, an acquaintance, something, and they're kind of like scanning the room for a better opportunity, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and that sense of like they're looking for somebody who might be a better fit for their friendship in that moment than you, like you're not worth their time, right? You're inconvenient. And I think we've all suffered the feelings that come from that, of feeling like, we're not being prioritized in that moment then too. But yeah, people are inconvenient, relationships are inconvenient, and investing in them is a sacrifice of one's time and resources sometimes, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
There's also a sort of way in which friendship requires us to think beyond kind of cloning. So when I was writing that book, I came across this phrase I thought was really useful, which is that friendship is about bonding, not cloning. And I think that when I was younger particularly, I really thought that my friends sort of were a sort of second self, a soulmate. I mean, that language is very old, it's hundreds of years old, which is that, in a friend you see a version of yourself, and perhaps we do expect that on some level, especially as we grow up. But really growing up requires us to know that when we're friends with someone who's very different to us, however similar our tastes and interests are. And that we have to learn to bond rather than clone with someone. We have to bond across difference. And that is inconvenient. That's always going to be inconvenient.
Okay, I'm going to ask one last question, and then we're going to turn to you guys for a quick Q&A. But I would like to know how everyone here today can make a friend. What do they need to do? Is it just saying hello? Is it that simple? It's so scary.
I mean, it starts pretty simply, right? And yes, saying hello, talking to a stranger, playing some Jenga with them, that's a good place to begin. But I think the number one thing that we can do is we can take some time and understand that friendships and relationships do take time, that there's an expectation there that it might not work immediately, and that friendship is going to take some of your time in order to cultivate, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I would say take the first step. Like say hi to someone. Don't wait for someone to say hi to you. That can help, can't it? A bit of small talk. a bit of maybe a question or two about them. Yeah, it's a simple way to start.